Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Succinct Psychology, aka Succinct. My name is Jaia Hendrickson, and today I'm going to be starting out Chapter 5 in Principles of Social Psychology. And again, I want to mention that these slides have been pulled from the University of Minnesota libraries, and they have been edited for presentational purposes. Alright, so Chapter 5 is going to be looking at attitudes, behavior, and persuasion. Some of the topics we'll be covering in this chapter are going to be exploring attitudes, changing attitudes through persuasion, and changing attitudes by changing behavior. Alright, social psychologists use the term attitude to refer to a relatively enduring evaluation of something. And that something that we're evaluating is known as an attitude object. And the attitude object might be a person or a product or a social group. When we say that attitudes are evaluations, we mean that they involve a preference for or against the attitude object. So for instance, when we say, I love Cheerios, or I hate snakes, or I'm crazy about Sam, we're expressing the relationship, either positive or negative, between the self and an attitude object. So statements such as these make it clear that attitudes are an important part of the self-concept. Attitudes tie the self-concept to the attitude object, and so attitudes are an essential part of us. Some attitudes are more important than others because they're more useful to us, and so they have more of an impact on our daily lives. And the importance of an attitude, as assessed by how quickly it comes to mind, is known as attitude strength. Some of our attitudes are strong attitudes, in the sense that we find them important, we hold them with confidence, we don't change them very much, and we use them frequently to guide our actions. Now, attitude consistency is that for any given attitude object, the ABCs of affect, behavior, and cognition are normally in line with each other. And so this predicts that our attitudes, for instance, as measured through a self-report measure, are likely to guide behavior. Research has found that there is a significant and substantial positive correlation among the different components of attitudes, and that attitudes expressed on self-report measures do predict behavior. Okay, so all human beings hold thousands of attitudes, including those about family and friends, political figures and political parties, abortion, terrorism, preference for music, and much more. And each of our attitudes has its own unique characteristics. No two attitudes come to us or influence us in quite the same way. Research has found that some of our attitudes are inherited, at least in part, via genetic transmission from our parents. Other attitudes are learned mostly through direct and indirect experiences with an attitude object. We may like to ride roller coasters in part because our genetic code has given us a thrill-loving personality, and also in part because we've had some really great experiences in the past riding roller coasters. Still, other attitudes are learned via the media or through our interactions with our friends. And some of our attitudes are shared by others. Most of us like sugar, fear snakes, are disgusted by cockroaches, whereas other attitudes, such as a preference for a style of music or art, are more individualized. And the table in the next slide is going to show us some of the attitudes that have been found to be most highly heritable. That is, they're the most strongly determined by genetic variation among people. So we see here we have some heritability to some attitudes. And we have abortion on demand at 0.54, roller coaster rides at 0.52, death penalty for murder at 0.5, open door immigration at 0.46. And these are just some of the attitudes ranked from most heritable to least heritable from a study done by these researchers back in 2001. And these attitudes, such as these, they form earlier, they're stronger, they're more resistant to change. But it's not yet known why some attitudes are more genetically determined than are others. Alright, so because attitudes are evaluations, they can be assessed using any of the normal measuring techniques utilized by social psychologists. Attitudes are frequently assessed using self-report measures, but they can also be measured more indirectly using measures of arousal and facial expressions, as well as implicit measures of cognition, such as the implicit association test. And attitudes can also be seen in the brain by using neuroimaging techniques. And this research has found that our attitudes, like most of our social knowledge, is stored primarily in the prefrontal cortex. And the amygdala is especially important for our emotional attitudes, and particularly those that are associated with fear. All right, so as I mentioned a few slides ago, the importance of an attitude, as assessed by how quickly it comes to mind, is known as attitude strength. Strong attitudes are attitudes that are more cognitively accessible. They come to mind quickly, regularly, and easily. We can easily measure attitude strength by assessing how quickly our attitudes are activated when we're exposed to an attitude object. If we can state our attitude quickly and without much thought, then it's a strong one. But if we're unsure about the attitude and we need to think about it for a while before stating our opinion, well, then it's a weak one. And attitudes become stronger when we have direct positive or negative experiences with the attitude object, and particularly if those experiences have been in strong positive or negative context. Because attitude strength is determined by cognitive accessibility, it is possible to make attitude stronger by increasing the accessibility of that attitude. And this can be done directly by having people think about, express, or discuss their attitudes with others. And after thinking about their attitudes, talking about them, or just saying them out loud, those attitudes that they've expressed do become stronger. Attitudes also become stronger when the ABCs of affect, behavior, and cognition all line up. As an example, many people's attitudes towards their own nation is universally positive. They have strong positive feelings about their country, they have many positive thoughts about it, and they tend to engage in behaviors that support it. Other attitudes are less strong because the cognitive, affective, and behavioral components are somewhat different. So, for example, my affect towards chocolate ice cream is positive. I like it a lot. But my cognitions, on the other hand, are more negative. I know if I eat ice cream all the time, I'll become fat, and that's not good for my coronary arteries. So these inconsistencies among the components of my attitude make it less strong than it would be if all of the components lined up together. Alright, so social psychologists, as well as advertisers, marketers, and politicians, are particularly interested in the behavioral aspect of attitudes. Because it's normal that the ABCs of our attitudes are at least somewhat consistent, our behaviors tend to follow from our affect and our cognition. As I also mentioned a few slides ago, attitude consistency is that for any given attitude object, the ABCs of affect, behavior, and cognition are normally in line with each other. And so attitude consistency predicts that our attitudes are likely to predict behavior. Now, it may not surprise you to hear that attitudes that are strong in the sense that they're expressed quickly and confidently predict our behavior better than do weak attitudes. So, for example, Fark and Sabrin found that in the 2004 presidential election, people who could more quickly complete questionnaires about their attitudes towards the two presidential elections candidates at the time, George Bush and John Kerry, they were also more likely to vote for the candidate which they held positive views towards. And people who have strong attitudes towards an attitude object are also more likely to have strong intentions to act on those attitudes. And the intention to engage in an activity is a strong predictor of behavior. So imagine that your friend is trying to decide whether she should throw away her old laptop battery or recycle it. We know that she has a positive attitude towards recycling. She thinks that she should do it. But we also know that recycling requires some work. It would be much easier if she could just throw it away. Only if she has a strong attitude towards recycling, well then she also has the strong necessary intentions to engage in behaviors that will make her recycle her batteries, even if it's difficult to do so. Attitudes predict behavior better when the attitude is measured at the level that is similar to the behavior to be predicted. Normally, behavior is specific, so it's better to measure the attitude at a specific level too. So for instance, if we measure cognitions at a very general level, say we ask questions such as, do you think it's important to wear condoms? Or are you a religious person? We won't be as effective at predicting actual behavior than if we ask questions more specifically at the level of the behavior that we're interested in predicting. So instead we could ask, do you think you'll wear a condom next time you have sex? Or how much time do you think you're going to go to church next month? And attitudes also predict behavior better for some people than for others. If you recall from the previous chapter, in chapter 4, we discussed the self, I talked about self-monitoring, which refers to the tendency to attend to social cues and to modify one's behavior to one's social environment. You may also remember high self-monitors, which were those individuals who tended to attempt to blend into the social situation in order to be liked. And the low self-monitors were those who were less likely to do so. So you can probably see that because they allow the social situation to influence their behaviors, the relationship between attitudes and behavior will be weaker for high self-monitors than they are for low self-monitors. All right, folks. This is the end of my first video covering Chapter 5, Exploring Attitudes in Principles of Social Psychology. I hope you learned a few things, and I'll see you guys next time.